Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Last summer on this channel I came up with the outlandish idea of releasing in-depth standalone videos on every video game in the Double Dragon series. A sprawling series of titles that started back in 1987 with the most recent game seeing release in 2017. That's 30 years of gaming history right there, thus meaning I have had to make 12 different Double Dragon videos covering the length and breadth of the by this point legendary franchise. Thankfully I am finally nearing the end with just a couple of loose ends to tie up. So in today's content we are going to tick another box on my Double Dragon video game checklist, ensuring that this is the deepest retrospective series that will ever be created on the history of these games. Surely I'm the only man insane enough to actually do this. Speaking of insane, while our famous Lee brothers are best known for beat 'em up action they often star in, did you know there is a video game where Billy Lee gets so bored of gang behaviour that he decides to take a shotgun to all of them? That's right, in this odd official release, our beloved martial artist goes full on postal. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the insane story of Double Dragon Billy Lee's Revenge. Yeah! The year is 1993. By this point in history, Double Dragon is more than an established brand in the world of video games. Arguably by many at the time to even be considered past its prime, with its heyday now behind it. As discussed here a million times before, Yoshihisa Kishimoto of Technos Japan would lead his team to release a smash hit in 1987 with the first Double Dragon game, with the title's 1988 sequel, Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, being even more refined and often considered the game which would set the trend for many more beat-em-ups arriving in arcades. Essentially, without the cooperative Double Dragon, there would likely be no Final Fight, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade games, as we know them at least. Double Dragon 3 would not be as good as its predecessors, with Technos Japan outsourcing the development of the game to an inexperienced team rather than Kishimoto & Co, with the NES Double Dragon 3 game being a different title completely to what arrived in arcades. Super Double Dragon would be the first title to not have an arcade counterpart, seeing release on exclusively the Super Nintendo, marking a turning point for the Double Dragon franchise as a whole. You see, the original Double Dragon trilogy had games that would first appear in arcades, then have conversions of sorts that would appear on many different systems. So it would be cool to see a Double Dragon game that was bespoke for a certain piece of hardware. Speaking of system exclusives, in the world of handheld gaming, the Double Dragon games on the Game Boy would all be conversions of Double Dragon 1, 2 and 3, so there were no games that were unique to that piece of hardware, but instead just butchered ports. On the Sega Game Gear, on the other hand, things were a completely different story, which brings us to the game that is the focus of this video, Double Dragon The Revenge of Billy Lee, a true Sega exclusive. Now let's be honest, a Sega Game Gear exclusive is always a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, as the system is notorious for mostly hosting a library of games that are available in tandem on the Sega Master System. Sega's 8-bit console that acted as a budget alternative to the Sega Mega Drive for many years after its 16-bit successor hit the market. So taking this into account, a large chunk of the Game Gear's library consists of games that appeared on both 8-bit Sega platforms, which was combined with often poor conversions of titles that originally appeared on the Sega Mega Drive. Keeping all of this in mind, I always find it nice to see a title that was only available on Sega's tiny full-colour handheld displays. But apart from being unique to the Game Gear hardware, you may be asking yourself how such an exclusive game came to be. Well, I guess 1993 was a year in which Technos Japan were prostituting out the Double Dragon license as much as possible, in order to continue to profit off of their biggest gaming cash cow. In the short span around this game's release of just a few years, Rare would make Battletoads Double Dragon, a Battletoads game available on various hardware that featured Billy and Jimmy, an absolutely dreadful Hollywood movie, an awful Western produced animated series which had little relation to the game's current story, and of course the horrible American made fighting game known as Double Dragon 5 that was created by Leyland Interactive Media. The Double Dragon Game Gear game would be yet another example of a video game that Technos Japan had practically nothing to do with, instead being both developed and published by British company Virgin Games. So, taking back into account that Battletoads Double Dragon is more of a Battletoads game than it is a Double Dragon game in my opinion, Double Dragon for Game Gear is the only truly British Double Dragon game in existence. But what exactly did this stiff upper-lipped creation actually bring? Let's find out. Double Dragon Revenge of Billy Lee, simply known as Double Dragon in North America, crudely offers pretty much the same box art as the original Double Dragon game that was published on the NES, which would instantly lead many people to believe it is simply the same game. But as already discussed, this game is far from a conversion, but instead built completely from the ground up. While the game itself does not showcase a plot within the game much, according to the back of the game's box, the title features one of the darker Double Dragon stories. Instead of Billy Lee's girlfriend being kidnapped by the Black Warriors gang, a group known as the Dragon Lords have murdered his brother Jimmy instead. So as expected from the game's title, Billy sets off to avenge his brother's death. Considering such events have transpired in this game's canon, it is no surprise whatsoever that the remaining Lee brother is willing to go to such lengths this time around. It seems as though that this game's bizarre story unfolds simply due to the development of the title being too slapdash to contain cooperative play. Arguably the main selling point of a Double Dragon game to begin with. They should have just called this game Single Dragon, to at least make the game's title relevant to the content that can be found within. On the bright side though, for an 8-bit title, as you can see, the game's stages and scenery are rather aesthetically pleasing to look at, with the game's backdrop being far more detailed than any of the stage areas that can be found in the NES Double Dragon games. The Game Gear's ridiculously rich colour palette is certainly utilised with this one. From the moment gamers start out on the first side-scrolling stage that this beat-em-up has to offer, Billy begins to make his way through a dystopian street setting that we would expect from such a franchise, but very early in can quickly pick up a handgun to begin wasting opponents, instantly marking a departure from what players would expect from a game named Double Dragon. The heavy use of firearms that was implemented into this game is an odd choice, but at least it makes the game memorable in some ways, I guess. This simple first stage sees Billy gunning down many thugs and street punks in this almost Streets of Rage and Final Fight-esque setting, before progressing onto the next stage that takes place in a bar area. Many of these stages are extremely short, but between them the game gives you a score and even logs how many hits you have both given and taken, so you can monitor your skill, I suppose. Despite the Game Gear's simple 2-button controller layout, the Revenge of Billy Lee features very clunky controls, making the game a chore to play at times, especially in comparison to the smoothness of the Double Dragon games that could be found in the arcades or on the NES. The title is certainly nicer to look at than it is to actually play. In the parking lot stage, a name that does not actually make sense considering this Double Dragon game was made in the UK and we say car parks rather than parking lots, it is clear to see that the developers were huge fans of Capcom, as the stage offers a part where gamers must decimate a car, certainly not a gameplay trope associated with Double Dragon. The game contains familiar Double Dragon and beat-em-up tropes in general though, such as getting to beat up sex workers, an element that is very rarely missing from games of this genre. Good old Linda is always willing to take a good pasting. While the game has enemies that look like the likes of Williams and of course Linda, the title has a distinct lack of Abobobobos, probably the most notable recurring enemies from the Double Dragon franchise, which is rather odd, but as I said, I feel like the game seems to take a lot of influence from other beat-em-ups, rather than Double Dragon Technos games themselves. A welcome surprise though that I would like to point out when it comes to this game is much of the title's music. In fact, I would go as far to say as the development team behind this game managed to make the Game Gear sing, as the music in the game sounds more like arrangements that would be heard coming from a Commodore 64 or ZX Spectrum, rather than a Japanese handheld. So the sound in this game most definitely delivers a very distinct European flavour, which is never a bad thing. At the opposite end of the, well, spectrum to excuse the pun, those old microcomputers often featured large swaths of bad conversions of famous Japanese titles programmed in Europe. And while this game is not a conversion as such, the gameplay in this title certainly lacks the same level of quality of what can be found in the good Double Dragon games out there, no matter how pretty the graphics and how decent the music may sound at times. Still though, in terms of the positives, I guess the game is functioning and does offer a change of pace from many of the other games in the franchise, even if the combat is not quite as fluid. Influence from other games as mentioned can be found all over the place, including motorbike riding enemies, another feature not traditionally present within Double Dragon titles. The dystopian feel of the game also feels like it gets dropped off at points, for example as players fight through a shipping dock, full of crates and other goods and services you would not expect to be present in an apocalyptic future. Saying that though, I guess we already live in a post-apocalyptic future, and we can still buy products from China from Amazon. So maybe the game is more accurate than I give it credit for. One of the more visually impressive looking stages involves fighting atop a moving train. Again a stage that in my opinion looks simply stunning for a level found on such rudimentary 8-bit hardware. You would never in a million years get a stage this detailed on the humble NES. As mentioned earlier, there are many times in this game where the team took full advantage of the Game Gear's amazing colour palette. And paired with the background scrolling effects, this stage looks particularly good. Eventually players end up inside this train, leading to a very Final Fight looking stage. If you have a keen eye, you will notice what appears to be other games the developers have worked on being displayed in the background. From left to right we can see Terminator, Chuck Rock and Cybercop. A nice little Easter egg there that was once again surprising in this Double Dragon game. The game eventually brings players to a stage setting that is much more synonymous with the Double Dragon franchise. A farm stage, which is nice to see they have included some references to other Double Dragon titles within the game. After finishing the stage up in a barn, players progress to the Samurai Mansion, where the Dragon Lords reside, with the stage backdrop displaying many endangered species heads hanging on the wall as trophies, suggesting that the owner of the mansion rather enjoys African safari hunting holidays, as seen on Louis Theroux. The stage contains an assortment of enemies, including many murderous gun-wielding maniacs. The game gets particularly weird in its final throws, eventually offering a huge boss fight against an enemy who would fit better in a Contra game than that of Double Dragon. Which in some ways makes sense anyway I guess, when we consider that like in Contra, Billy in this game often runs around with a bloody gun. Kicking this opponent in the head enough leads to the Black Samurai appearing, a character who is said to be the leader of the Dragon Lords, the very group who killed Jimmy. Hitting this bizarre throw though reveals that the Black Samurai seems to really be Jimmy, leading to a plot twist that perhaps Jimmy was never dead to begin with. Defeating the Black Samurai restores Jimmy back to his regular self, with the game's prologue revealing what the hell was going on. Well, kind of anyway. The text congratulates you for saving your brother, and informs you that you have broken the inner circle of the evil Dragon Clan, freeing the world of their power for now. Concluding this strange title means that Billy Lee ends up murdering loads of opponents with various firearms, with no harm actually coming to his brother at the hands of the Dragon Lords to begin with. Does this make Billy actually the biggest criminal in this game's world? Well yes, in my opinion. It was a very naughty boy in this one. Guns don't kill people, Billy Lee kills people. But yeah, that's about everything that this strange outing has to offer. So, let's see what the internet thinks. Hardcore Gaming 101 released a piece on this title, and summarised that, despite first appearances, The Revenge of Billy Lee is a horrible, borderline unplayable mess, the bottom of the barrel as far as Double Dragon titles go. Only the most tenacious players who aren't ashamed of abusing only the cheapest and safest manoeuvres repeatedly against the far too long waves of enemies will ever face the weirdly eldritch final boss. Double Dragon Dojo hated it too, stating it's kind of a toss-up as to what is the worst conversion of Double Dragon. The Game Gear port is certainly in the running for the title. What killed this game is sloppy design and crappy programming. Period. In the early 1990s there was no excuse for a game like this to have slipped through the cracks, and I'm surprised that Virgin's quality control let this pile of dung reach the public. This is pure crap. Defunct Games, adding to the pasting, commented, overall what we have here is a real stinker, accidentally called Double Dragon. Well, at least it isn't a 2-on-2 fighting game as the equally piece of garbage called Double Dragon 5 on the Atari Jaguar. If you're looking for a quality street brawler for your Game Gear, get Streets of Rage 2 or Battletoads. If you're looking for a quality conversion of Double Dragon, try the Game Boy Advance edition. Despite its criticisms across the board from gamers around the world, we still cannot take away a few things from the game, most notably the fact that this is a true exclusive for the bloody Sega Game Gear of all devices, so at least that is something notable to talk about, right? And the fact that Billy goes full postal with a machine gun is most certainly one of the more ridiculous moments from the franchise, if you are aware of its history. So I am glad that I have potentially made more of you aware of this obtuse oddity today. It certainly is interesting. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the insane story of Double Dragon Revenge of Billy Lee, a crazy Double Dragon game for the Game Gear. In terms of our Double Dragon journey, I only have one more stop to take you on, and then we will finally have completed this ridiculously long Double Dragon retrospective series. So subscribe now if you want to see me cover the Double Dragon iOS game. If you want more fun YouTube content on my wrestling channel known as Top Hat Wrestling Man, I have a new video covering the man who fell in love with a mop. And on my wife's channel, Lady Decade, she has uploaded an in-depth video covering the history of the official Indian variant of the NES. So bearing in mind that quite a few of you have asked me recently to upload some new content on console hardware history, I would imagine you would enjoy her unique video, so be sure to check both of these out. Speaking of others' work, I would also like to give a huge thank you to Tommy of Phantom Studio, who I commissioned to draw this rather unique Double Dragon thumbnail art. There was nothing online to portray the ridiculousness of this game available, but he managed to make the idea for the thumbnail image I had in my head come to life in spectacular fashion, so I could not recommend what he does enough. Give him a follow on Twitter and check out his other art. Finally, huge thank yous go to my Patreon backers who provide me with additional funding that helps the day-to-day running of this channel, including being able to create content on obtuse subjects such as Game Gear games that are not likely to get great views. So thank you for all of your support throughout this tough pandemic. In regards to patrons, shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, The Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo, Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corey R. Marcini, Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Ryan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Azure Rakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Mike Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Felicio, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Blamick Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard G. Stewart, Dan Van Damme, Lewis Fiant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Sinspaces, Zai, Andrew Bazanski, Alex Summers, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who supports my work. Thank you all so much. Cheerio.